Okay, welcome everyone. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we meet on today and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So today's webinar is titled Ideas to Reality, and it really explores the journey of 4 very unique providers working in the NDIS space. It showcases how passion, drive, and great ideas can make for a successful business model, and more importantly, the impact that we as providers can have on our communities and the individuals we all strive to support. My name is Agnes Simon, and I'm a member of the EDSN Steering Committee. And with all the other members that are with us today, and also we would like to welcome you, the guests, and also our amazing presenters. I'll now hand it over to Steve Lowe from Boosting Your Local Workforce to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes, and welcome everyone. My name is Steve. I work for the Boosting Local Care Workforce Program. I'm the South East Victoria Coordinator, so down and out through to Gippsland, and my job is to talk to providers and give resources and networks and supports and to support the market. And it's sort of the new NDIS market that we're here to talk about today, ideas to reality. And one of the things that we knew back in 2011 with the Productivity Commission and in the ensuing 10 years is that we were going to see a change from a welfare model to a service model centred around the person who lives with a disability to increase their economic and social participation amongst us around our communities. And we knew that this wouldn't just be with the old NGOs and state-run welfare services, that we would have a much more dynamic landscape. And it's interesting in discussions, we hear words like landscape, I think, a lot more than we used to, and words like dynamic. So joining me today is Pieta Manning from Mable, Tanya Johnston from District 360, Keeley, Goldrick and Sam Winzar from Pathways to Care, and Kate Coleiro, I do apologise, from Clarable. These organisations were all formed by individuals and are companies. They do a range of services. Some are support coordination and plan management, some do direct services, and they're going to talk about their experience rather than a non-government organisation that's been with us for 60 years, their experience of being with companies or even starting companies that are as old as the NDIS or even younger. Tanya, let's start with you. If you could talk about why you decided to start District 360 and also describe what your innovative model is.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the invitation and thanks for having me. So I'm from WA. I've only been back in Australia for 5 years, so quite relatively new to the disability sector, but having come from working in both Vietnam and China and also Sydney prior to moving. I own an events and entertainment company in Vietnam, and then moving back here, falling into the disability sector with transferable skills, I wanted to bring some fun. And what I saw that was a lacking in the sector was that, providers not working with each other. So one of the first, gig that I did was took a bunch of kids to, well, not kids, young adults, to a music festival where I had different providers sponsor, everything from T-shirts to the transport vans. So it was managed to pull them all together. And then I was also working for another staffing agency for aged care, and I got them registered for NDIS. So from there, I went on and helped other businesses get registered. And then I was also lucky to be a recipient of the BRCW grant. So then that sort of took me forward, and I thought I may as well do something and, really enter it with my passion. And that was really to create fun. I want to bring some fun to the sector. But also just making people smile. That's what we love, capturing those unique moments. So we provide support coordination, but also direct services. At the same time, I guess the key thing for us has been the creating unique respite experiences. So
And
taking,
you've grown. You're now in more than one state, so you've got significant growth. You're managing that growth. You're seeing the company and your reach expand. Are you still having fun?
I am. I am. So we've got another festival coming up. We're lucky in WA that we're not in lockdown, so we have a festival. So that's where my passion has lied. Really just being able to pull together large groups. So, you know, one of our trips to Rottnest Island was, we had 35 people all together. That's including staff and participants. And that was just creating those moments. And, you know, I talk a lot with my team around social capitalism. Yeah. And that's where, I guess, you know, it's also, you never know who you're going to run into. You may leave this company, but you're always going to be within the sector. Yeah.
Well, we hope. We certainly hope people stay in the sector. Now, Pieta, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mable started because one of the founders wasn't happy with the care that a family member was getting.
Yeah, actually, so Peter Scutt, it actually started with an aged care solution. Peter Scutt's parents were in Wagga, and his father had dementia and his mother was really struggling to support him at home. And Peter was looking for a really individualised solution to his family and started to understand just how difficult that was in the traditional system, but knew there were great people in their local community. His parents wanted to stay living in their family home. So he actually started employing workers to go in, care workers to go into his family, and sort of realised that this was a solution that a lot of people would look for, and created Better Caring back then, now Mable. But very quickly that was taken up by the disability sector. So this was 2013. I remember meeting Peter in Canberra in 2014, and to be honest, this idea of, you know, having independent workers who are completely managing and self-directing their own supports and who they were engaging with, and how it was a little bit challenging at that time for us. I was you know, I just opened my independent coordination business in Canberra, and I found it a bit challenging, even though I thought I was doing pretty cutting edge stuff. So, but I think what's happened over the time, what Mable's role is now, we're a bit of an odd fish. We're not a provider, and we don't employ. But what we're seeing and what we know, Steve, is over the last 6 years, exactly as you said, the increase in demand for individualised support, the increase in, you know, the requirement for delivered care hours. We are struggling. I mean, our sector is facing one of the biggest workforce challenges I think that any sector has ever faced in Australia. So what Mable does is says, look, let's go into communities and let's activate those communities. We know that that independent workforce is incredibly important to maintaining our sector. Mable says, let's give it a framework. So what Mable does is provide a safeguarded framework that allows independent people in the community that want to provide support to enter a framework that has all the verification requirements, that provides that support around insurance and business processes like invoicing and receipting and timesheets and keeping service notes. We provide that very secure and complete CRM for them. And then on the other side, saying to consumers, you can choose. You know, you can look at your community and see who's there and actually get quite bespoke type supports. And I think one of the signature pieces of Mable that I really love, and the reason why I love working for them, is we're all about partnerships. Our business is built on the partnership between an independent support person and an independent consumer. And a lot of what we do is work in partnerships with other organisations and other service providers. So it's really not about a competition space. It's about complementing each other's services and really creating that great suite of bespoke services that meets the need of that individual.
Brilliant. Now, Keeley and Sam, the pathways story and innovation, and your model. And I think what I'm really enjoying about today is that we're hearing around a whole lot of different models and a whole lot of different approaches. And the NDIS is big enough that we can have all of them. And I think that diversity is something to really celebrate. But anyway, Keeley and Sam.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So I suppose Pathways to Care was born just before we actually moved into the NDIS, and it was actually two ladies and a small business, and they were actually writing and running foundation skills and certificates in TransEd and working with people with intellectual disability and registered training organisations to, you know, build people's social and communication skills, literacy skills, and those sorts of things. And really, probably they found they wanted to do more with those people, and they had all these people with all this potential and coming in with intellectual disabilities, but were a bit limited by that. You know, the funding and how the RTOs were set up. So then really when the NDIS came along, and I was working within the NDIS as an occupational therapist, and we really saw that, I suppose, as an opportunity to support more people in a really way that could be tailored around those people. So we started plan management and support coordination, Steve, and I think plan management at the time, we thought, oh, this will be a great way to help us learn the price guide. And I think Roz started doing that with an Excel spreadsheet, and I started doing the support coordination. So it was, you know, that was probably 4 years ago now, which is really crazy to believe, given it honestly feels like, you know, probably a year or two. And I remember Kim, who's in the chat here, you know, meeting Kim, going out to visit one of our first participants. So really from there, we've grown. There's about 40 members on our team now, Steve. We've got Keeley managing our support coordination services. We support people across regional Victoria as well as in the city in Melbourne. And, you know, it's been a huge learning period for us. And, you know, I think we were really lucky that we were quite a small organisation and we hadn't been around for years working under other systems. So, you know, the NDIS was really it. So we got to work with what was in front of us. But I'll probably hand over to Keeley, I suppose, to talk a bit more about some of that information. But that's really where we've come from and where we are now. And, you know, looking forward to the next few years, I suppose.
Brilliant.
Got to remember to take off mute sometimes. Isn't it a challenge? I think I do that at least half a dozen times a day. So if we talk about, I guess, the experience of a provider who is trying to navigate, I guess, a changing environment and changing landscape, as Steve spoke about earlier, and how we've had to innovate as a business model. And just to respond to Mark in the comments, this is an experience of both it's not relevant to whether you're a small provider or a large provider. All of us have had to sort of, to use that word, pivot from one sort of operating model to another based on the constrictions that was COVID-19. Very, like, particularly relevant to those of us who are in Victoria. So to give you a bit of an insight, my background is largely in trauma therapy. Before I came to the support coordination model. So it was a little bit of a stretch or a little bit of a jump from sectors. However, the instant thing that I was able to sort of detect with working with clients and participants and working with my team was that the role of support coordination and how it was initially conceived by the agency sort of undercut how essential it actually is and how essential the function is of support. And that applies to all intermediaries, I must say. It's not just support coordination, it goes to plan management too. So that essential conduit between the individual and the wider and broader system that's there to help them thrive. So we initially bandied around the idea as a company around remote working models, and my initial default as a trauma or health practitioner kind of said, no, that's really risky to send people into their homes to sit there and help people going through really immense or challenging experiences in their life. It's a really poor idea to have them do that in their safe space from home, because how do you separate work and home life? So I was a bit anti. My director, Roz, was, really forward thinking, and she was trying to help me sort of understand, no, this is a really good model. It can work. There's lots of cost efficiencies that can happen from a business perspective. And if we have the right mindset, we can do it effectively. Other people are doing it. I resisted until COVID happened, and then boom, obviously COVID forced a lot of things for every type of provider, not just the small ones, but also the large ones.
Talk to me about efficiencies. You see, there's an opportunity here to have a more efficient and I know with the values you guys operate with effective. How do you identify and implement efficient practices?
Well, if we think about efficiencies, there's, as a business operator, you know that there's those standard ones about reduction of overhead costs. So if you don't have an office for people to come into, you're not paying rent, you're not paying that sort of real estate cost. You also aren't necessarily, you know, needing to pay for the level of travel that people have. For instance, if they're, you know, servicing, you know, vast areas of space but are expected to travel back to the office to sign off for the day. We're talking about cost efficiencies. They're the really obvious ones. But to kind of go back to it, Steve, they turned out to be less impactful. Like that essence of having people best bound and that stranglehold on bums on seats mentality, which all of us as you know, as traditional managers had for a really long time. They're out the window now. They just don't exist. But there were really certain measures that we were put in place to appease, I guess, myself as someone who has come from an industry that puts participant or client care and also safeguarding our staff at the front of mind every single time. And that's, you know, that would be the same regardless of what organisation that we worked for. I was just blessed to be at Pathways to Care, who kind of, you know, went with me on that journey, I think. So if we want to talk about the sort of steps that we put in place, not to occupy too much more time, but we completely revitalised our business model. And, you know, that's information I'd love to share with other providers who are here watching. So we completely changed our hiring practices as a safeguard as well. So only people with bachelor's qualifications in either allied health or human services were recruited, just to add that extra safeguard, because there is elements of training that are delivered to them as that package of qualifications that essentially says, you know, you have to understand your own self-care methodologies. You have to understand how to identify emerging risk. You have to understand when you need to be able to tap out and say, listen, this is beyond my level of experience. That's not at all to say that people who have not done those certain qualifications don't have the ability to do that. But we did know that if we had to change our operating model from a work from office to a hybrid or remote model like that, that hiring practice gave us an extra degree of sort of safety and certainty. But it was also much more aligned to the actual demands of the support coordination role, because as at Pathways to Care, we actually wanted to get sort of down and dirty and in the trenches with individuals, and not just be the connector of supports, which really support coordination can be minimised to if you don't have a good understanding of the role.
And support coordinators, technically, there is no qualification barrier. There's higher qualification barriers for a level 3 support coordinator. I'm going to check with Kate now. We might swing back in a minute and talk about innovation around recruitment. But Kate, let's talk about you and Clarable.
So Clarable are a little bit different from most of the speakers so far. We're a very small organisation, and we've actually only coming up to our 2nd year in our business, and we've operated exclusively nearly in COVID. So we haven't had the opportunity to be there before COVID and really adapt to the conditions. So I suppose a lot of the things that the other speakers have been saying, we've felt the same. We started off thinking that we'd work from a hub, and given COVID restrictions and everything like that, we had to go to that more remote approach, and we found that that really works for our clients. I should have mentioned, sorry, Clarable offer allied health therapy and also support coordination across Melbourne. So just so everybody knows where we're from. And yeah, I suppose the reason that Tanya, our director, started Clarable was she found previously working as an advocate and assisting people with NDIS access, that there was a bit of a gap in the system with clients specifically with dual disabilities, and she really wanted to hone in on that and be able to assist clients across the board and really, I suppose, give that person-centred approach, family inclusive. And we're concentrating on not growing hugely quickly. We really want to deliver a quality of service and provide that support to clients. Sorry, you were going to ask a question.
So Clarable do specialise in working with people with more complex needs?
Correct, yes, yeah. So across, all different disabilities.
Virtually?
We're doing face-to-face as well, but, it depends on the client and their specific preferences. I suppose most people will know, given what's going on in Melbourne, that people are preferring not to have that face-to-face just because of the current health conditions and risks that are in place. So where possible, we're doing it online, phone, Zoom, and then obviously if there's a preference or a crisis situation, then we're having to do face-to-face appointments as well.
Let's think a little bit on one of Keeley's words from a minute ago, which was pivot. And I think it's a really interesting point, Kate, that you guys didn't pivot. You've built a business during a pandemic, which is a really interesting and brave thing to do. I think, wow.
Yeah, Tanya's amazing.
For those that did pivot, whether it's around recruitment or working with participants to have more virtual communication, how has it gone? What are the lessons of it?
I think one of the things that we need, I think that's come about in the last couple of years is that leap of faith, I suppose. For me, I look at the NDIS and having been involved right from the start, we really are undergoing a bit of a generational shift in our participant body. So, at the beginning of it, we spent a lot of time talking to people about the consumer experience. And I think it's almost like be careful what you wish for now. We have a new wave of participants that are coming through, and also their families. So we have participants who are highly self-directed, that are digitally savvy, or we have a new group of younger participants whose families have much higher expectations for their family members than would have been previously held 10 or 15 years ago. So I think one of the challenges that we have is how we meet that expectation, and I think that for us as professionals in the sector, how we look at this highly directed participant body who are often quite digitally savvy and are on demand. These are people that can ring up and order, these are young people that can ring up and order a bubble tea to appear at their front door in 10 minutes. This is a group of adults who are used to, navigating Netflix, deciding where they're going to get their next phone plan from. How do we, as service providers, meet that demand, but also reflect our requirements under legislation and the regulation and guidelines of the NDIS? So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges for us is, meeting that sense of people want to do more, they want to have greater choice, but how you're able to meet that on the other side, still meet those regulations. And that in the NDIS has been very difficult. And for us, it's a lot of education because people don't necessarily have the time to stop and understand that, no, you can't have that service, or we're not able to provide that. So it really is a really uphill struggle with ongoing education and trying to really continually capacity build our participants to understand what's going on and what the pressures are as a service deliverer.
I think, Peter, to add to that, our experience has been somewhat on the other end. So COVID, when it struck for our participants, largely a lot of our work became super crisis driven. So that ability to go from a base level of functioning for the people that we work with, everyday life, into helping them thrive, that went down the drain. and it became around helping people just make ends meet during the time of crisis. And I must say, going from a model where you had access to people, like a hands-on access to people, where if they were having a really rough trot, you could just tootle on down in your car to go and sit down with somebody to say, how's your day going? What can we do? You seem pretty down. Can we connect you with a different kind of service, or can we put another community activity in place that's going to help you, uplift your spirits? Our playbook, I guess you could say, for helping people in those sort of moments was severely restricted. So to go back to Steve's question around being able to pivot from, to our recruitment practices and things like that, having individuals who were better resourced from the outset when they came to the business with levels of understanding and cognition around the Victorian service sector, or as we grow nationally, the other service sectors. One of these things that we need to think about is thinking of things that are outside of the NDIS box. And I think because of how big and how wealthy our service systems were in the NDIS, we had fallen into the trap of being quite NDIS centric when, come COVID time, that didn't work so well. The other thing is that in terms of the pivoting perspective, we added extra layers of non-client facing support, because what was really obvious is that our team members were, because natural empaths, you absorb the feelings, emotions and hardships of the people that you work with. And without, as one of the biggest complaints of the support coordination or NDIS industry will say, worker turnover is the bugbear of not only employees, but the bugbear of participants. So we were quite the biggest, not the challenge, but one of the pivots that we had to make, which was really, costly, but required a lot of capital investment, a lot of care. We had to put a lot of support staff for our actual team members in that were non-client facing. So in those moments where they needed, that wraparound nurturing to help them make it through working with some participants, we need people able to pick up the phone right away when that call happened. So investing in our staff's care, as well as investing in our participant care, became the biggest decision as a provider we had to make. And again, that I'm sure that would apply to small and large scale providers, because everybody in Victoria would have been experiencing the same thing.
But Tanya, as someone who's in Victoria and Western Australia, is your experience similar? Have you had to sort of put more into communications with participants and staff and have those pivots around comms and styles? And you were saying earlier, not as much in Western Australia because you haven't had as many restrictions. For you, your pivoting is mainly around the innovations of NDIS opportunities. But have you found a similar thing in relation to how you communicate both with clients and staff and the resources you need to do that?
Yeah. So having started in COVID here in WA, when I first started the business, and then launching in Melbourne in your last lockdown, it has been a big pivot. What we've done is really focus on the mental health, but not only for our employees, but also with the participants. So having a strong build in working, predominant majority of our caseloads, probably 70% with mental health issues. Yeah. So moving into Melbourne, we've actually refocused on that and working highly with the clinicians to train our workforce. And then, just making sure that we keep those communication lines open. So we've got platforms that we use to keep connected with our support workers, but also, being support workers being able to talk with each other while they're, transition between shifts and stuff like that. I think that's the critical part.
So how do you, and this is an open question for all of you, remember, I'll start with Tanya because she's opened the barrel, but how do you, both viably with NDIS pricing and virtually, given the pandemic, support and train and supervise staff, let alone recruit them?
I guess our operations are based in WA, so the team here is quite highly experienced and have been working in the sector for quite, if we looked at collectively, they've been working in the sector for quite a long time. And just branching off into Melbourne, we've been able to utilise the resources here to leverage Melbourne's growth.
Now, Kate, what about you guys? Because you do want particular skill sets in some of the therapeutic supports. How do you provide this support and training and looking at staff retention? And how do you guys do it?
And it's mostly been remotely over Zoom. We've employed, like our systems, procedures, all of that has been done remotely over Zoom, phone calls. Because we were set up through COVID, we haven't had that opportunity really to meet with people to be able to put those things in place. So we also have employed, like most organisations, I'm assuming, has EAP, constant catch-ups, buddy system with our support. Like all of our staff have buddies to keep in touch with, regular check-ins. I think that's really important, especially through COVID, because like Keeley mentioned, that the stress on our staff is one of the main things, and that creates the turnover. So we really need to look after each other and support each other to get through.
You talked, I think you guys don't say so much, and often it's hard to break it down, but it's interesting you talked about a buddy system, because we can't have Christmas dinners. We can't.
No.
I mean, it's really important with our staff and our clients that they have a sense of an identity with us, that they feel they belong with us. So talk to me about the buddy system. What was the thinking behind that?
So the buddy system is more within the staff, and just catching up regularly with each other, providing that support to make sure they're coping okay, dealing with the current situation that we're facing that's constantly changing, and then regularly checking in with management as well, having meetings as regularly as we can around, and still I suppose that's one of the things that Tanya's really focusing on is the well-being of the team, because that's a priority. If the team's not well and looked after and supported, then we can't provide that quality support to our clients.
So it's interesting for us, you're right, that communication. So one of the things that we found really useful, particularly because we are working nationally, is we've got a great team that are really making sure if there's a new announcement about a change in Melbourne or a change, it's doing SMS straight out to the clients and the workers in that area and giving them information around specifically their situation. And we found this really important last year in Melbourne, that reassurance for participants that they could still get support. So it's like at every single change, making sure that the clients get that really specific information. Okay, this has changed. There's been this announcement. This has changed in your LGA, but this is what's going to happen. And then also saying to those independent workers and those support providers, okay, in your LGA, this is what you now need. You need a permit. You must wear a mask. You must do this. You must do that. So it's really tailoring that information, we found, to make sure that people are still confident to get support, because often that was the issue, was, when things changed. I think in Melbourne, we're a little bit more, we're sort of used to it, which is an awful thing to say, but making sure that people were confident to receive support, because that immediate reaction was, does that mean I can't see my therapist? I can't do this. I can't get that important support that I need every day.
Well, I want to flip that a little bit and we're going to use this to move to Rebecca's question. I think you're Rebecca about recruitment, but I want to start with social media. So we're talking about communication, we're talking about sense of belonging. Do all of the panel members here use social media as a communication tool for both clients and staff?
Yes.
Yeah, we do, Stephen. It's been something we've been working on, I suppose, over the last couple of years. We've gone from having a Facebook page that might have just sat there with a few staff members liking it or following it, to something that we're now trying to use, a lot more of to get information out to participants, as well as, reach new participants as well, but also, engage people with our staff members. And, I think we find from our Facebook and our social media, having our staff up there, is the thing that really people seem to engage with quite a lot.
Is anyone using social media as a staff recruitment tool. So I know some providers that aren't using Seek, they're not using Ethical Jobs, they're not getting anyone from there. They're actually usually using social media not as communication just for participants, which is absolutely vital, Sam, because it is that sense of belonging and we can't get together anymore. But they're also using it for staff engagement and even staff recruitment. Has anyone got any sort of experience or insights into social media as a staff training and recruitment and retention tool?
I guess for me, with the staff recruitment side, having coming back to Australia, I started Perth Jobs, and that has over 15,000 members, and I've leveraged that to use for a recruitment tool.
Yeah.
And
LinkedIn we've used as well, Steve, and I know, that I suppose, typically I didn't always feel that was going back a platform for so many, disability or health providers. I always, probably in my head, and this is probably incorrectly, thought of it as always a, very, very businessy sort of, corporate sort of thing. But probably more and more now there are more, disability providers using it and people getting on there to actually share jobs and connect with each other, which is a really good positive, I think.
We've got the life-changing work campaign that's coming out of the NDIS workforce report. I think that's going to be interesting to see if it's going to drive any. That's the ultimate social media campaign. I mean, and they've done a great job producing those videos. And I mean, and the indication out of that is that there'll be some sort of a job board that people will then be able to go and access. So, I think that's the ultimate version of social media for recruitment. I mean, the challenge then, of course, we know is at the other end, how you, as you say, virtually, how you're engaging. But I think that's one of the pieces of innovation that we've had to understand is that, yes, we need a thorough and rigorous verification for onboarding workers. But at the same time, we need to understand that this is going to have to happen at a larger scale and potentially remotely because of COVID. So how do you have those things in place? How do you, use the tools that we've got around Zoom and, verification processes? Because we are going to have to be engaging people that we won't necessarily meet straight away face to face.
I think a lot of cohort of our the workers are generally very social media savvy, the internet savvy. They spend most of their time there, so providing information, resources, and just getting the information out there, what NDIS is about, that sort of attracts people too.
Because it is those attracting people. I mean, one of the with Rebecca's question to us is finding quality staff. Is there, given that our workforce is tripling, and I'm talking about aged care and NDIS, we need 3 times as many staff as we had 10 years ago. Given that, is there enough quality staff out there, or are they becoming unicorns? Is it about finding quality staff, or is it about finding people with potential and growing your own workforce?
Steve, I think this is a really good point probably for me to try and answer from the support coordination perspective, having sort of entered this conversation saying that we made a significant change to our recruitment practices. So not only did we want to, we're talking about unicorns, they're actually not unicorns. From our perspective, it was up to us as an industry to make, I can only make reference to support coordination, but we need to make efforts to grow our total available market of workers, which means that in essence, it's our responsibility to make ourselves employers of choice and to make support coordination in particular a career choice for people coming out of university. Because the way that the NDIS at times, and particularly when you go into plan reviews and things like that, the way that support coordination is depicted at times, it makes the role this big. And it doesn't necessarily make, it isn't an illustrious career choice for people who have done a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in some kind of allied health or social services. So I think it's important for all of us to take a degree of responsibility to make this a meaty, robust, challenging real sort of like is something that somewhere where an individual coming out of university could thrive. And I know that there's lots of discussion around case management and support coordination being very, very different, but there are elements of support coordination that give that same level of exposure to service systems. So if we think about the role of support coordination as being the conduit between health, welfare, sometimes justice, sometimes childcare, sometimes education, sometimes social and community activities. If you are somebody wanting to get grand exposure to different facets of the service system and people's world, support coordination is a bloody ideal job. So you can actually, it's the way that you package up the job role. The other thing that we should be doing, and we are doing, is that we need to be able to connect with universities so that, as far as I'm aware, there isn't necessarily a bachelor's degree in support coordination like there is in rehab counselling or something like that. So connecting with social work schools, connecting with health services schools and things like that to go and present at days or to hold university placements, to give people a taste test of what it is that we're actually doing for the community. I think we have a professional responsibility to get out there and show our trade as something that is really worthy of doing.
And I think you're right, and I think Pieta's also right in the timing. We've now got the new campaign from Department of Social Services, Changing Lives, and I agree that they're fantastic. It's a great campaign, and videos. We have the NDIS, the National Workforce Action Plan 21 to 25. Now we're going to and I'll get to Roger's question in a tick. With Lemon's question around other alternatives, and I think, Lemon, we mentioned social media and Facebook. We've mentioned having to do that piece of work Keeley's talking about, whereas if that external selling and reframing of what our sector is happening with the DSS campaign, Life Changing Lives, there's the internal work we can do. And now is the perfect time to do that work, as Keeley was saying, in how we frame ourselves and how we frame the opportunities of working in this sector, because we've got this national campaign that started on Sunday. So it's a fantastic, I think, launching pad for that, because quite often I talk to a lot of providers and they say, we need more staff, recruitment's our key issue. And I think this piece around the community understanding what our sector is and its opportunities is really important. But I also think that we can do a lot ourselves in how we utilise our current staff, because everyone is talking about recruitment. When I talk to workers, they say, gee, I wish I had more hours and was utilised a bit better with this employer, so I didn't have to have 3 employers. I think there's a piece of work we can do about utilisation as well. If we move from sort of innovation around recruitment to innovation around planning and strategic planning. So Roger's asked about the phasing out of SC. I'd like to rephrase Roger's question to there are too many crystal balls around. What we know is that there is a lot of policy changes and price guide changes, and that we don't always feel that the ground is stable. So how do you guys in your enterprises and your jobs, how do you steer through that? Because I mean, what we know very quickly about support coordination, Roger, is that if independent assessments came through, LACs wouldn't be building plans, they'd be helping implement plans, and that may change some interface of support coordination, but not eliminate it. And there's a similar discussion, similar but different discussion around plan management when they bring in digital pricing, or which is something they're talking about. But rather than look at those specific issues, I think the broader issue for people running companies and services and trying to meet needs of clients and run a business is, how do you guys manage being innovative and forward thinking when we have all of these rumours and all of these policy and pricing changes?
I think right from the start, I remember, years and years ago with the agency, it's like when you're talking from someone from the NDIA and you can't get a straight answer for them, it's not that they don't want to tell you, it's probably that they don't know themselves what's going on. I think, Keeley, you're absolutely right in the sense that we need passionate people who want to be a part of our sector. I think potentially what we need to do is stop thinking about specific role. That person going to come in always going to be a support coordinator. Or our aim at the moment basically is just to, I think should be just to attract as many good people, spark the interest in people to work in our sector. And then once they, there's a lot of talk about how much free training available there is. There's these grants that are available and we're going to do this and we're going to do this. We need to get people to the front door, first of all. We need to get people to the front door and interested in coming in. And I think that is a real challenge. And you're absolutely right, Keeley, it speaks to how we as a sector engage with people. And also, I think how we start to alongside the government campaign and a final, finally an acknowledgement of the need is also a huge opportunity. I know for Mable, I think about 30% of our community engagement team at the moment have all come from the travel sector. Amazing commitment, high level understanding of customer service, such a great skill set. You've got all these people who have a fantastic skills in our community who are facing loss of work or reduction of hours. Transporting those skills into our sector would be amazing. So really, I think for me, it's about, in terms of, how we face this, is about broadening our view and thinking about, once we get these people interested in working and we can frame what we do in such a positive way, then we can start to help them with education and training. Amazing access to online training now in terms of qualified training, so much free training available from Dementia Australia, from RMIT. There's so many great universities presenting free training. But I really think as a sector, for me, it's about broadening our view and really be willing to have a conversation with lots of different types of people. And also, I think, Steve, I know you and I have talked about this. There's no way we're going to find, the number of full-time employees that we require. So I think starting to understand that getting a great person for 20 hours a week, let's take that person. We need to start being a little bit more flexible in our ability to employ and accommodate the worker as well as the client. So starting to think about, let's be honest, the biggest need in our sector at the moment is not clients. I mean, we don't need more clients. We need more workers. They are actually the resource that we're chasing.
I say to people that if you look at the three basic stakeholder groups in the NDIS, being providers, participants, and workers, there's only one of those stakeholder groups that has full choice and control. It's the workforce. Now, Kate, you were nodding your head a bit earlier in relation to attracting people with comparable skills into the sector rather than people with direct sector experience as well. I saw a bit of the head nodding.
Yeah, I suppose I was coming from the fact that a lot of our staff have come in from different aspects. So we have myself, I've done a degree and I'm a developmental educator, but then, I've got a disability background, but then there's other staff that have got a therapy background and a wide range of therapy backgrounds. So we have art therapists, we have someone from social injustice. So like, sorry, I've forgotten. Peter was saying from Mable, utilising those skills that we have that are not necessarily disability honed, but trying to utilise their skills in other ways and train them to be qualified in the areas that we require. And like I suppose Keeley also said, there's no specific training or qualification for support coordination. So it really can come from a huge scope of background experience and knowledge, and training them up to be qualified in that area and provide that great support.
Yeah, I think another sort of untapped area along those lines as well, Kate, is people from culturally and linguistic, I always stumble on that, diverse backgrounds. Like we've found there's communities of people, and like being in some of the regional centres as well, there's these huge populations of people that have come to Australia in real need of additional support. And like, you know, we get lots of anecdotal stories about, you know, really young people supporting their parents living with disabilities, or people that have come to Australia, and trying to engage some of those communities, I think, you know, all around the state and country, I suppose, to include them in some of the roles that we're offering and things like that as well, would be a really huge, you know, benefit to us in finding appropriate staff, but also helping those people access the NDIS through people who understand their culture and, you know, can work really closely with them, is another area that we want to, you know, continue to work on, I suppose.
Dawn's just commented as well, you know, word of mouth, I think, you know, is absolutely, you're absolutely right. So, you know, we've had a lot of really negative stories told about our sector in the last year or so. And I think it's almost like, you know, as individuals, what can, you know, as individual organisations, what sort of case studies can we produce? Like you said, Keeley, you know, who's telling the story of I mean, if you jump on social media, all I see is posts from exhausted, completely spent support.
Yeah, you're right, Peter. Sorry, you've just dropped out. You're right. It's an industry that's sort of rife with burnout, I will say, and I think we have a responsibility 100% of making sure that there's structures in place.
So to have those structures in place, one of the things you can do, and when you're recruiting people and retraining, hopefully retaining them and supporting them virtually and with innovation, how do you do that? Do you have an employee values proposition? Do you know what you've got that is attractive to employees? Do you guys have workforce action plans? I mean, do you do this strategically, Keeley?
Absolutely. So when we talked about at the start of restructuring our company, and this is something that can be implemented by anybody. It's just about operating within the constrictions of the revenue you're generating through the NDIS. So let's be completely honest, and this is not a NDIS, you know, NDIA bashing moment. $100 or $100.14 an hour to employ a support coordinator is very challenging to not only employ those individuals of a quality nature, so with the qualifications, because there's certain pay rates that people expect when they come out as grads. It's also hard to put to pay for non-direct servicing staff. So if you were to have, like in what we did, you've got, you know, Sam and myself who kind of help with the operations and business management side of things. But then under that, in each of our regional teams, what we did to appease some of those concerns I was having about the wellbeing of staff, we've got a team leader for each region, and we've got a clinical lead for each region. So that was a takeaway from my previous work life working in that sort of trauma and therapy space, because what we were having was that it was very hard for that team leader to be the one person to everybody and to provide all facets, because the team leader, we've envisioned that they're going to be somebody who helps them with the administrative and job role functions of support coordination. So billing, case noting, documentation, 9-month reports, all of that sort of stuff that we know is like out of sight, out of mind, but really essential to running a good business of support coordination. On the other hand, we need that person who has got a really clinical mindset to identify risk, to provide clinical supervision if someone's having a really tough day, to be able to practice, to grow an individual's practice, to understand people's disability or mental health concerns, but also to work on that relational dynamic between the SC and the participant if things aren't going well.
Keeley, can I just ask, so this is one of the things that I see as well, is our sector is a little bit like the duck on the water. Up the top, we sit and we say, we're going to provide you coordination, but underneath the little feet, do your participants have any sense of the amazing support structures and the fact that they're $100 an hour? You know, I think it's really important that, you know, do they understand that this is all the on costs that you're bearing as a business to provide them with a really good quality of service?
The feedback that we've got, Peter, has been around the fact that having these structures in place or having a clinical lead in place is a point of escalation, because they're really honed, I guess, in a way, in systemic advocacy. So they know the sharp and pointy end of how to get blockages in the system removed for said participant. So when you know what hits the fan and you can't get a response from the hospital that you need or the NDIA because the plan has gone MIA, those instances, our clinical leads actually step in and develop a relationship with the SC and the participant, because they're our gun to come in and say, listen, this is what we need to do to get the response you need. And that's probably the time, because people notice the difference. They notice, and as much as I want to say that as an industry, the health system's respectful of the NDIS and the job that we fill, or the justice is respectful of the role that we fill, it's actually up to us to educate them about how essential we are. So when somebody with a clinical background who has a confidence and a skill and a capacity to go in there and go, right, as service systems, you aren't behaving accountably, and then refer back to the COAG principles, if they can't do that, then there's no point in them being there. But our clinical leads are hired specifically to do that. It is costly though, so I'm not going to say that it's an easy run. It's costly.
If we think about the employee value proposition of, you've got clinical leads, you've got good staff support, you've got a good culture, so you've got your employee values proposition. What about your workforce planning? So how do you know when to hire, who to hire, and how to hire? How do you do that workforce planning? Any tips?
Sam, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, good question, Steve. And I think it's probably something that we are.
Because how do you forecast when, as Roger's saying, I'm worried about support coordination, we're worried about pricing changes. How do you forecast your staff growth and staff numbers with confidence? But anyway, I think the forecasting, it's about, do you hire for what you've got now, or do you hire for the demand you see in 3 months?
Yeah, great question, Steve. And I'll put my hand up first and say we've definitely not been perfect in that as we've grown. I think back to when we first started up, and we were always chasing your tail, I suppose, Steve. And it's probably a thing that everyone can relate to when you are, a new small organisation, you're working within these confines. The reality is not many people have got the money to have, let's hire 3 people now, and, Steve and Keeley are going to sit there for 3 months whilst we find more participants. It just doesn't, make sense for growing businesses to do that, I suppose. So, we have really improved that. And, as you say, in terms of that forecasting, from our end, we have tried to put lots of time into that. And, lots of these things come back to those, challenging decisions about what can we invest in, and getting a business advice and buying tools, or, getting tools together that help us forecast when we are going to need new staff in line with that growth. And, it hasn't been perfect. I think about our different sites, how they've grown at different rates. We started off in the east of Melbourne, and we'd filled up, myself and 2 other support coordinators, really quickly, when we're always catching up. And then we went over to the west of Melbourne and thought, right, let's put 3 support coordinators on, because we know they're all going to be full in, a matter of weeks. And it really didn't work like that. So it's really,
plans may not be perfect, but the wonderful thing to hear, Sam, is that you have one.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Made the decision to have one. And then you worked out how to have it, what the format was, and it's not perfect, and it's not perfect because you do the second most important thing, you review it.
Exactly. And that's where, I think having our different sites, Steve, we've been able to look at those models, like Keeley said, with the team leader and clinical lead, and sharing some of those responsibilities, inducting staff, onboarding staff, and training staff has been a really big help for us. And I think, as Keeley said, and I'm sure is the case in lots of organisations, with the NDIS price limits, there's actually, you need to innovate to allow people to get that career progression. Like with support coordination, for example, with a rate of $100 an hour, you can't have people, unfortunately, coming into that role and going up and up in pay when it is that sort of cap. So coming up with those other roles, the clinical lead roles, the team leader roles, you know, trying to develop other aspects of your business like the specialist support coordination helps attract those people and keep them on board and give them that value. But yeah, I think
so
it's...
You have your employee values proposition, what Keeley was talking about the support and why it's good to work there and why the sector is good. You have your workforce plan about who to hire and when, and you have your career pathway.
Exactly.
That's three really good things. Tanya and Kate and Pieta, have you sort of had similar journeys in looking at those aspects of your engagement with workforce?
Can I just say, I think going back to that, I was sort of trying to get with Keeley, my thing here is that we need to be communicating this to our participants. I think this is the thing, is we, as a sector, the duck on the water, you know, we are working under price guide gaps. We are trying to provide really good quality services. Like I say, you know, we're going over and above what the expectation are because we want to meet the regulations, but we also know that we as professionals, we want to be able to provide services that we feel good about. So I just want to comment that, look, I think that this is something that we potentially don't do well as a sector, is, you know, that previously, because disability was built on such a closed sort of circuit, you know, and so participants often didn't know how much they were being funded. They didn't know how much they were actually paying for services. And that was one of the big changes with the NDIS. Of course, it all became transparent. And people were suddenly going, hang on a second, I used to only pay $40 a night for respite. And you'd be going like, seriously, did you really think it only costs $40 a night? Of course it didn't. This is the actual cost. But I think what we haven't done as a sector is taken that next step and actually been even more transparent and said, look, this is why it costs this much, and this is why, because we are building all these safeguards in, and we are doing all this planning, and we are, you know, doing all this screening, and we are doing all this training because we're really focused on quality support. So I just think that's something that, you know, we can probably all take away and have those more direct discussions with our participants and say, this is why it costs this much. Because we are providing you with a quality service, and there are all these, you know, ongoing costs. You know, we are really being super efficient with your money to give you the best support that we can.
Yeah, definitely for us, yeah, that, you know, we've had to look at different areas, and having an employee value proposition is critical, but also the workforce planning. It also drives with demand. So I guess because we come from a very casual workforce, we're quite fortunate in that aspects that we can start people off with casual, build the caseloads, and then move them onto a permanent role. So if we look at our support coordinators across both Perth, Melbourne and Kalgoorlie, they've all had started casual, and then we had moved them through to permanent. So we've probably got about 70% of our support coordinators now permanent, and then, you know, support workers the same. We're doing the same there. You're on mute, Steve.
Oh, I was going to say, I suppose we're a little bit different being a smaller organisation. We're just feeding by demand at the moment, and obviously we can't cater to everybody, and we're mindful of that and how to refer to other organisations that have the capacity to be able to help our clients. And we're not the right fit for everybody, and we understand that, and we're happy to collaborate with other organisations and refer them on to someone that's suitable. But as we grow, I'm, you know, keen to take on lots of the things that everybody's been saying, and I think they're great points to be made.
But Kate says that you don't have to grow. You can be happy with your size. You can be happy with how you are and what you are, and refer people on and say, well, here are some partners, here are some other people. Our workforce plan is that we actually want to maintain our current shape. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's really interesting. And, you know, I think that there's more than one, you know, one size does not fit all.
That's right. And there's enough work out there to share around. Like, I mean, there's such a huge demand. I think it's, you know, everybody has their little niche in the market, and it's good to respect those niches and work together and collaborate and help clients to be provided with the right support for them.
I'm going to bang on a little bit more this last question about workforce planning. When I asked Sam and possibly Tanya, how did you know that you needed a workforce plan and how did you get one? I mean, it wasn't the first thing you thought of when you started a business.
Having come from a multinational company and working as a HR director, that helped a bit.
Sam, what about you guys? I mean, the workforce action plan wouldn't have been the first document the company wrote.
No, definitely not, Steve. Probably well down the track. But you know, I think what spurs it on, and you know, in line with what Peter was saying about the participants, that's what dawned on us to really, you know, make actions about that, I suppose, is making sure you're meeting the needs of the people that you're supporting. And that's what really pushed us in that direction, I suppose. You know, when early on you're getting to the point where staff are overrun, you know, that's really not assisting the staff, because as we know, you know, finding people and retaining them is so difficult, as we've spoken about. But also the participants that we support, it's, you know, you're doing them a disservice if we aren't managing that workforce appropriately and giving them the support they deserve. You know, that's not what we're about. So those are the things that probably really spurred us on to have that plan in place, you know, and manage that appropriately. And I know, you know, since Keeley's come on board, it's something we've further developed. And I know you've unmuted there, Keel, so I'm sure you got something to add. I'm not sure.
I think we knew we needed it from early onset, but it is something that there is a significant capital investment to get something that works properly. Unless you've got some sort of Excel wizard gun that sort of sits inside your business, which I know a lot of us do. You've got hidden talent in various pockets that you can draw down on and access. But if you're confident in your people, and if you're confident in the networks and relationships that they're building with referrers, I think one of the things that we did do as a business is take away this focus on billable hours as a performance metric. Yes, billable hours is important, but introducing some of those qualitative performance measures for our staff was paramount to ensuring that we had a constant flow of referrals and business. So how often are you connecting with them? What is the diversity of support that you're offering them? Are you getting positive feedback from families? Are you actually helping them to explore options that are outside of the NDIS? Some of these things that when we're treading water, we don't get to do. So if we sort of pair it back to, there are various performance metrics we can apply to our business. And that applies if you're a support coordination, plan management, direct support workers, or individualized supports. It applies in every way, shape and form. The dollars coming into the business are not the only thing that we should be looking at, because that gives rise obviously to those ethical considerations around price gouging, overcharging for supports, all of that jazz. So I think one of the things that we did know is that once you get a run up and that ball starts rolling, and I'm using the metaphor of the snowball going down the hill, with every good quality service that you deliver, a new quality service knocks on your door, sort of thing. So developing those really good relationships with, you know, we positioned ourselves as a business a while ago, so we're thinking about business continuity, Steve. We wanted to position ourselves as a business that could help anybody handle anything. So if we're thinking about that kind of LAC versus support coordinator split, that may well be an eventuality. Safeguarding our business was making sure that we remained a cut above what the LACs could offer. So if you are thinking about sort of protecting yourselves as an organisation, and I really strongly encourage people to think about this objectively, if you're a support coordination agency, it's a good idea to start making sure that you can deliver above and beyond what anybody with 10 to 20 hours worth of support coordination hours can do. So hence the reason getting better qualified people, or getting people trained up in doing some of those complex care coordination tasks, was the right decision for us. In terms of the modelling, although it's not a fixed trajectory, we actually do have the ability to say, based on previous months worth of referrals now, and with enough collated data, there is a trend that we're seeing. And again, really, really investing time and reward in your staff in building networks. So one of our key performance metrics might be, you know, how many new services did you connect with, or how many times did you go out and present information around the role of support coordination to a particular agency, so they're better acquainted with our job. Systemic advocacy and its essentialness to our industry can't be downplayed. So I guess if we're talking about it from that perspective, you know, not just somebody talking about pathways to care, but if there's one little bit of advice or support I could kind of provide to the audience, that systemic advocacy piece and educating the industry is pivotal to our survival.
How do you do it? Without giving away too many secrets.
Gosh, polish your reputation as a provider, and people will feel comfortable to ask you questions. I think that's one of the big things. It's that investment in quality service and constant supervision and development of staff, so that when those tricky questions that people can't generally answer around support coordination, and it's another discussion altogether, that there is not, or there wasn't up until recently, guidelines around what good support coordination looked like. You know, there was no instruction manual when we started this business around how do you deliver support coordination, which is just so bizarre, by the way, for something that costs a lot to do. So, but we didn't take that as a reason not to make one. So we wrote our own support coordination manual, as I'm sure many of you guys would do. And we put a lot of those performance metrics in there around quality of service. But with that good practice came recognition of the work that we could do. So we constantly have conversations with the exceptionally complex needs support pathway around, do you guys have capacity? You know, said individual has had all of their care relinquished. Would you consider coming on board to help sort of resolve issues? You know, it's up to us as businesses to decide our market positioning. I think that's a really important conversation to be having, and it's a standard business conversation, not just disability. You have to decide the market that you are targeting, and the one that we have seen fit to target is around, we can support anybody because we will resource ourselves with the skill, requirements and knowledge to deliver the support that's required.
So there's a lot of there's strategy as well as organic sort of growth and thinking. I really like what Kate was saying before about, hey, this is our ceiling, because rapid growth can be very damaging to yourselves, to the company, to clients, to everyone involved when you grow too quickly without those foundations. What else? What other enablers of innovation is there for companies in an NDIS space? What I really like is that you guys have talked about what I find exciting, but a lot of people find boring, is those strategic enablers, that you've sat down, you've thought and you've planned, and that you don't just leave the plan on the shelf. It's a living document. What else enables a successful business in an NDIS environment?
I think I'll go back to that capacity building. You know, we are dealing with a group of consumers. You know, we're talking here about quality and our commitment to quality. You know, as a sector, how do we educate the consumers to understand what quality is? You know, a lot of them don't have a baseline to understand, you know, what their rights are underneath, you know, in the framework, in the NDIS framework. So for me and my team, one of the big things that we are trying to do, we're still doing capacity building. You know, I built a business in 2014 about community capacity building. That was my tact, you know, and we're still doing it. You know, 7 years later, we are still helping people understand the opportunities that are presented to them by the NDIS. But then, as I said, understand the safeguards and that they need to also consider. So it's great. You can go out and, you know, you can go out and get anyone you want, but should you? Should you not be concerned about that person's background checks, their ability to provide that service? Are they fit for that service? Do they have the correct, qualification? So to be honest with you, a lot of the stuff that we do in community is not actually educating people about our model. It's educating people to give them a choice, to give them the confidence and the knowledge to make an informed choice. And that to me is still one of the pieces of work that we need to continue, and it's still going to be happening.
So who does that work, Pieta? Do we as providers do that work to our potential marketplace? Does the NDIA do that work? Does the NDIS Quality Safeguards Commission do that work? So when you say we need to do that work,
I think
who do you reckon we is?
I think it's a sector. I think we as a sector, we need to educate. If you take it out of the disability language, we need to be educating our audience about our products. So we know the NDIS are not going to do it. The Quality and Safeguards Commission are going to do it from a regulatory lens. So that's, it's about, we're going to regulate the workforce. It doesn't build confidence and encourage people to make decisions. It actually makes people go back a bit. I think it is us. It's pathways from care, explaining to people this is what good quality coordination looks like. This is why we think our service is different. It's all of us saying this is the work we are doing because we want you to have choice. We want you to have choice and control. We want to provide you with information, and doing it in a really if you look at a trust equation, it is about acting with a little bit of, without self-interest, and it is an investment, and it's an investment that you make at your own cost. But it is sometimes those things. It's reaching out to clients and saying, hey, about those changes to the price guide, this is what's going to look like for your services. But you have this choice, and this is why we're going to do this. We are going to charge you a little bit extra because we do want to take time with our team to make sure that we've got time with our team to really give you the best quality services as we can. So it's that constant communication and education, I think.
You guys this morning really have, what you've been demonstrating is that you're on the front foot. This is how we communicate with clients. This is, yes, it costs this much. This is how we inform and empower clients. This is how we engage with staff. So it's not about necessarily, and I'm sure it's happened to all of your clients saying, your buggers, this costs too much and I don't like your stuff. I want you to do this. I have choice and control. Rather than let that happen, you guys have taken the front foot. Would be one of my key takeaways from this discussion.
Yeah, spot on, Steve. And I think, in line with what Peter said there, that getting on the front foot and, making those somewhat difficult decisions to invest in our staff and our processes and our technology have really been our biggest enablers, I suppose. I think that investing in the right people to support and grow our team has been probably the single biggest thing that's helped us, move forward and succeed, I suppose. Those things like professional development, induction, your team culture, and putting that time and investment into those things has just helped, no end, I suppose. The other really thing that's, enabled us to grow, and I think everyone, that's speaking here today, the flexibility to adapt within the NDIS, and being organizations that have started up in the middle of a pandemic like Kate, or providers that have started with the NDIS, gives us such a great base to work with, I suppose, when you're looking back historically at some of the really big organizations that have been in disability for 10, 20, 30 years and been under different funding models. Being new organisations and having that flexibility to work solely within the NDIS, I think, is such a key enabler for us to succeed.
Now, we've got 10 minutes left of this session. I want you all to, and even though I sort of said a while ago, it's dangerous to have too many crystal balls, but I actually want to contradict myself. I want you to get your crystal balls out. And is there a way of forecasting or at least planning for those different contingencies with that flexibility, Sam, and the ability to pivot? What do you think our landscape will look like in 2 years?
Read the tune review, I think. Yeah.
Very interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, just have a good read. I think as a business, that's probably, if you've got a government that's saying we're going to endorse all of the recommendations or as throwing their weight behind it, as challenging as it may be as well, obviously, because I think all of us are kind of feeling a little bit gun shy around the legitimacy of some of the policy and recommendation documents that have come out, because lots of hearsay around, you know, editing post-release and all of that kind of jazz. So the independence of some of these things has been questioned. But I would probably say the best thing we have in terms of a crystal ball is the tune review and the Productivity Commission's reports around sustainability. The other thing I'd probably say is keep an eye on the outcomes of our recent census data as well, because I think all of us can kind of acknowledge that the way, you know, the actuarial modelling that built the NDIS was, you know, vehemently flawed because of inaccurate census data around the true representation of people with disabilities in our society. I don't think that's going to be the same problem this time round. I think we'll see that, you know, as a market, we are here where we are positioned at the moment, but we can only grow. And just, you know, those cost structures around how we make our scheme sustainable. Just because you can have more doesn't mean you should. It's just about making things more effective. So I don't know. Again, I think that that's a network approach, but that's my answer, Steve.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, because that's not just about landscape. That's about, these are the signposts on the landscape. This is the cliff to watch out for, the tune report. I throw in the Royal Commission as another signpost on the landscape. But if you haven't read the government response to the tune report, I couldn't agree more, Keeley. Read it. It's because it is a signpost, as will be the Royal Commission. As is, I think, the government's, even when it's reluctant, ability to listen and respond to participants in the sector. And I think also to see the provider sector as a significant part of that landscape. What do other people think about the landscape in the next 2 years? Well, Pieta's disagreeing with me.
I sort of think that I agree with, absolutely. I think from the point of view of the agency and where that's going to go and where the scheme, you know, I think once the legislation is opened and there are, I mean, that's probably to be honest with you, my concern is it's a Pandora's box. Once their hands get in that, you know, once legislation is open, what is actually going to change? My comment would be, though, that I think that we have to go back to, you know, what is the landscape going to look like for our participants in the next 2 years? And I think that's really is going to have to, for me, I understand that, you know, we're going to have this legislative changes, these frameworks, but ultimately it's going to how do we take that and meet the needs of our community, a community that is becoming really interesting. There's going to be this real increase in parochialism where people are going to want to only have supports from a very small area. You know, we have feedback now about, you know, people being concerned about workers moving around, like even with Greater Melbourne, you know, people not wanting workers from a particular area to, you know, so we're going to see the impact on how people want their supports delivered. You know, I think that's going to be something that's really going to shape how we deliver our services is, you know, how do we increase that education around digital literacy to make sure that people can access telehealth and can access, you know, virtual supports when it's there, you know, and that will happen very quickly. I mean, I just observed to you that my daughter's 19 years old and has Down syndrome, and she knows how to use Zoom, Google Docs, Google and Microsoft Teams out of so I think we have to be careful not to underestimate our consumers, but at the same time support them to understand that they still can access support. My fear is that I don't want to see us atrophy. I don't want to see us get too caught up in the overhead, you know, the overhanging changes. We still need to be responsive on the ground to what people mean and make sure that they are getting the supports that they need, the supports that they have funding for, and the supports that they need every single day in their lives. So that's, for me, is how we're going to respond, and we have to keep listening to our consumers and our communities and making sure that they're getting the right support.
Love it. But you're basically saying our landscape is going to be defined by our marketplace, our clients, our consumers. Love it. Knowing that we still need those sign points of the tune, I still want to read the tune review, because I'm sure you have too, Pieta, but I love that statement. Our landscape is going to be dictated by our market.
And ultimately, you know, I say to people, like I talked about the duck on the water, but that is essentially, that's our role. We are professionals in an amazing, demanding sector. And that is what we get paid for. We get paid to have to balance all this stuff. And at the end of it, make sure that people have the opportunity to live valuable, valued lives in our community. And let's be honest, we've probably all got skill sets that we could go off and work in another sector, but that's really why we're here, because we love the challenge.
So we've got a few. Tanya, you're off mute, but we'll hear from Tanya, Sam, and Kate quickly before we wrap up.
I think being a business owner, it's also being very agile. So, you know, we know NDIS is going to be an evolving beast. Yeah, it's going to continue to change, and it always has. But if we lead with the quality and be flexible, come up with those ideas, understand your standards and your guidelines. There are grey areas. That's where innovation can happen.
Brilliant.
I think everybody answered everything I was going to say.
Well, yes and no, because you guys are doing it a little differently, Kate, because it's for you guys, it's around we're sort of happy with how we're doing this, and we'll keep this organic growth, given that we still have that strategic thinking and the ability to pivot. And
yeah, long term, I think that's exactly right. I mean, ideally, we'd love to grow, but in time, and when the time is right, and when we feel confident in all of the things that we have in place and providing quality support.
I'd firstly like to thank Kate and Sam and Tanya, Keeley and Pieta for their time this morning. It's been a really interesting discussion. I would like to remind those of you attending that if you are wondering how to start with these strategic policies, how do I do a workforce action plan, reach out to the Boosting Local Care Workforce Program, reach out and join networks like the EDSN, Eastern Disability Services Network. We're here to have that collegiate and to offer that support. So do feel free to reach out to either of those or other bodies. There are certainly a fair number around now. With that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you very much, and look out for the next EDSN webinar, probably happening in October. But thank you again, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.